Right, well, welcome everybody to tonight's presentation. Probably by way of introduction, my name's Tim. You know James, you might not know me. I'll be your chairman for tonight. A few little logistics things before we start. If you're after the men's and ladies and you haven't been here before, out the door, turn right and look for the men's and ladies signs. If you haven't found them and you've hit the kitchen, you've gone too far. Some logistics from the car park point of view. And I don't wish to cruel the spirit of the night, but if we could just be mindful of the neighbours and just be a little bit quiet when we leave. Apparently, there have been some complaints in previous events, so if we could just be mindful that we are in a residential area as we leave, just be a little bit quieter, that'd be great. So onto the better part of the evening. Tonight is the first of three presentations. Why I am. This one's a why I am not, but the others are going to be why I ams, and we're looking at basically narrowing down focus. We're starting with why I'm not an atheist. So we're looking at the difference between atheism and theism. Why somebody might believe there is no God, and James is going to provide a testimonial about why he believes there is a God. And then if we believe in a God, why I am a Christian. So narrowing it down to that to Christianity. And from there, the third presentation will look at why I am a Christadelphian. So a smaller part of Christianity, why I'm a Christadelphian. And hopefully over the series, we'll end up with a very good view of what it means to be a Bible believer and why it is an important part of not only our presenters' lives, but life in general. So with that out of the way, and also one other thing. This will be an interactive night. So for those of you who came in late, as they say in the Phantom comics, there will be some QR codes up here for when you want to log on. So if you've got a device with you, you can use a QR code to log on here and submit questions during the night. And at the end of the present, through some of those questions, and we'll be doing his best to answer them. Although, knowing James, it won't be an attempt. It'll be pretty good. So fire off your trickiest questions, and we'll see how we go. I'll give a personal prize for the trickiest questions. So please keep those in mind. So before we begin tonight, obviously this being a presentation by the Christadelphians, if you bow your heads, we'll just open with prayer. Our Father in heaven, we come before you at this time to thank you for all that you have done for us, but in particular for providing your word, for providing a hope through that word, for providing a hope to us that this world will be changed, that we will see your justice and your peace. We ask for help in understanding your word, for help in understanding why it is that theism, believing in you, is an important part of life, is a vital part of life. We ask for your help and seek for your guidance as we come before you through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. So with that as an introduction, I'll step aside now and invite James to the stage. Thanks, James.
All right, after that awkward silence, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. Despite the weather, I did fly in back today from Adelaide, and I was feeling sick until about 10 minutes ago. So I hope that the winds didn't blow everyone away, and I hope everyone was safe from the fallen trees which appeared on my drive back from the airport. But it is great to have you here, and if you're watching online on the Melbourne Christadelphian page, it's great to have you with us as well. And if you're watching this on a recording, you should have been here. Tonight, as Tim had said, this is the first of a three-part series, as has been introduced, and it is Why I Am Not an Atheist. Now, I want to just explain, this is not why you shouldn't be an atheist. And in our next section, we're not going to talk about why you should be a Christian or why you should be a Christadelphian. Now, that might be what happens, and that might be the thoughts that go through your mind. but we're not here to preach at you. We are here to testify. And I'm here to testify to you today, and for anyone watching online, why I am not an atheist. Now, to understand that, you have to sort of determine a little bit about me, and that is that I actually am a Christadelphian, which means that I am a Christian, and I am, therefore, a theist. And that's what we really want to take step by step. And I was a multi-generational Christadelphian. So what that means is that I grew up with this. I grew up knowing God, knowing Christ, and interpreting them in the way that Christadelphians do. And I don't know for anyone who is in the room tonight, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but I got to university through what you may call a crisis of faith. Not that I was losing my faith in God at the time, but as has been observed in the past, comprehension without critical evaluation is impossible. And as I was in engineering school, I began to get asked very difficult questions about whether I really comprehended what I believed. Not that it made me feel good, not that it was a workable worldview, but really whether it was true and whether ever in my life I had really provided critical evaluation to why I believed what I believed. And there were 1,000 questions that faced me at university. And for all of those who are young here at the time, whether you're in high school or whether you're at university, oftentimes that is where the foundations of your faith can get shaken. Because university is there to wrestle with critical ideas. It's there to test concepts, wrestle with them. And unfortunately, in the last, for me, from my worldview as a Christian, unfortunately, over the last many years, that worldview has become under some serious critique. And many would now mock at the idea of God. And that is 100% what happened for me. Now, I took courage in this statement that was graffitied onto the floor when I was at university. At least this person believed in God, but hated God. But you know, there are people that come to hate the God that they grew up with, the thing that they knew, the understanding of how they would believe in this God. And the more they learn and get challenged about that God, they could actually come to believe that God probably is there, but not like him very much. And what has happened over the last number of years, especially with gentlemen like Richard Dawkins, and this happened literally when I was at university, right at my last year of university, the God delusion came out. And it was really the first, what you almost call a militant version of atheism. Now, if you are an atheist here in the room tonight and you are online, I'm not saying any of you are militant, but in terms of the approach, not the general culture at which this was presented, it really shook me to the core. And Richard, while there were books that were written in response to that book, Richard Dawkins and those who support him had articles written and banners produced, like this one, for example, that went around the UK. There's probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy your life. Now, every word there is chosen, especially the word probably, because no true theist would say, like I could say there is a Apple mouse here, there is God. And were God to reveal himself in a big banner in the sky and say, hey, I'm God, I'm here, for the vast majority of people, that would not make any difference to them. If you want any proof of that, read the Old and the New Testament. Humans generally, even in the face of explicit evidence, doesn't necessarily mean it would change their behavior. And there have been plenty of people who squander their life despite believing in God. Now, for me, as a Christian here tonight, I can tell you that I have not had to give up any joy in my life. The joy that I derive most deeply and most lastingly comes from my belief in God. So this is a false dichotomy that I and you do not have to trade at all. But when you think about it, just to give you an idea of what Professor Dawkins actually would say, This is his conclusion about there being no God. And obviously, on this, he's a very accomplished person, and he is a rational thinker. So let no one, whether you're on the streaming here tonight or whether you're here in the room, let no one say that anyone that doesn't believe in God, therefore, is not a critical thinker. That is not the case. Richard Dawkins is a very intelligent person. But he concludes, for example, by all of his observational science, he believes that in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at the bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. So do all people end up concluding this for life? Well, no. And some of you may have seen this debate recently in New York City, which quite clearly is where I'm from, if you haven't worked that out. There are people that revise their atheism into theism when they try to live that worldview. One such person is someone who left Islam, became really one of the 4 or 5 horsemen of the time, and has quite recently become a theist. And I'd like to just quote a short conversation from this debate because I think it's insightful. You have to appear to be a theist. This is Dawkins to A.N. You have to appear to be a theist. You appear to believe in some kind of higher power. Now, I think that the hypothesis of theism is the most, this is Dawkins speaking now, is the most exciting scientific hypothesis you could possibly hold. And the idea that the universe was actually created by a supernatural intelligence is a dramatic, important idea. If it were true, it would completely change everything that we know. We'd live in a totally different universe. That's a big thing. It's bigger than personal comfort and nice stories and these things. The idea that the universe has lurking beneath it an intelligence or supernatural intelligence that invented the laws of physics, that invented mathematics, is a stupendous idea if it's true. To me, that simply dwarfs all talk of nobility and morality and the comfort and that sort of thing. Too right. He is too right. You see, the consequences of there being a God are so incredible that we really can't just leave it alone. And as Dawkins rightly says, it's bigger than being comfortable, whether it's nice, whether this is a nice thing to be part of. What matters is if it's true. And so the moderator in this debate, after hearing Dawkins talking about her, said, so would you have rather preferred your new atheist colleague, A.N., not to have converted, having heard her story? And Dawkins says, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying that religious belief is bigger than what gives you comfort. It's bigger than morality. It's bigger than what gives you comfort and morality. It's bigger than what gives you a bulwark against Islam, which was her previous worldview. It's something that is huge and something terrific, and it's false. But from her perspective, her conversion to Christianity, her fundamental reason is that it's just a worldview that can't work. It can't answer the question. Atheism can't equip us for the civil. Saying that a couple times. If you were up here, you couldn't say it either. But she explains it like this. I think Christianity does have a recipe, and perhaps in my view, the best recipe for not only how to live with yourself and connect with the universe, but also how to connect with fellow human beings and then bring about a civilization like this one. That's her view. But here is my question. Is it enough to believe in a worldview because it's conducive to society. Well, that might work, and that might be true. And we here in Australia are the significant benefits of a society that was built on the Judeo-Christian worldview. But that doesn't mean it's true. That doesn't mean you have good reasons for it to be true. It just simply means that it works, and it's conducive to society. That doesn't mean that it's true. And these are the kinds of questions that I had to face when I was at university. I'll tell you a quick story. I was working with one of my colleagues, and some of you might know I like to collect various things. One of the things that I like to collect is fine wine. Now, my wife, under strict instructions not to bring a fridge monstrosity to my house, she said, "You can have it, but it's not living in my house." So I decided to keep my wine fridge to store and age these fine wines at my office. Now, I was having a conversation on the plane with one of my colleagues, and he says, "Well, I was in your office the other day, and I noticed that you have some very, very nice wines." And he says, "Well, one of these days I might just have to go take one for myself, and you just might never know." So he was obviously giving me a hard time. And I said, so I better not say his name in case he ever watches this. You know who you are if you're ever watching this. He says to me, "Well, if I did and I got caught." And I said to him, "But would it have been wrong if you stole it?" He said, "Well, I couldn't really say it was wrong." I said, "So you're telling me that on the basis of rational thought and empirical evidence that there are moral values and duties, you're telling me that stealing is not objectively wrong?" He said, "I could not say that it was wrong." I said, "So on what basis do you differentiate between right and wrong, good and evil?" And he simply said to me, quite simply, on the basis of what's conducive to society. Now, I've heard it said before when someone explained that same reasoning, that in some societies, they eat their neighbors, and in other societies, they love them. Do you have a personal preference? The question of God and whether he exists and whether it matters and what implications it has for societal and moral living has been asked many, many times. And I'd just like to find out in the room here, and if you're watching online, you can actually participate with this. I'd like to figure out what you identify as, and I'm particularly interested, seeing as probably the majority of people here are coming from a religious perspective, at least the way I did when I grew up. But that doesn't mean that's necessarily where you are right now. But let me explain what the options are before I have them vote. Now, if you guys are on the Menti here, you can go ahead and advance two of those, Alistair, to the slide where people can enter their age. Now, fundamentally, if we work all the way backwards, as Tim said, just all the way back, just zoom out as far as you can, you start off with atheism. Now, what is atheism? Let's just explain what that is, because definition of terms are important. Atheism is non-theism, unbelief, and it's the assertion that there is not a God. That's what A means. There is not a God. That is atheism. But you don't skip straight from atheism to where I am today. Some people then are not sure, and so they move to agnosticism. There might be a God. They have strong doubts. They're uncertain. There might be a God. That's what we call agnosticism. Like, you're not certain, but you haven't really, you don't think there is not a God. You don't have evidence that there is no God. The next level, and this is where many people in the world end up. You probably noticed that in Australia, in the last census, you probably would have noticed that many people have stopped to identify as being religious. But there are plenty of people that retain being spiritual. Now, that is that there is some God, and maybe we just replace that with power. You ever hear that? Like, there's some higher power. This is like deism. it's being spiritual. There's some higher power, but whatever this higher power is, it's indifferent, or he or she or it or whatever. It's indifferent. It's non-personal. It's more like a power. But then as you zoom in to get a little bit more specific, we look at theism. And that is, there is a God. There is a specific God, and that God can be known, and that God cares. And then as we move a little bit more specific, we land on faith, which is where the Christian faith is in the Judeo-Christian worldview, and all the Abrahamic religions technically are in. There is a God, that God is revealed and can be experienced. So the question I have for you today is, how do you identify? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch, and I would like all of you to participate here. First of all, it's really good just to see in this room, where are you at? So first of all, your age. Where are you at in life? And this could be proportional to who has a media device. So this might be a skewed data set. Thank you, everybody, for voting. Now I'm going to move on, so you have 2 seconds to get your age self-identifying in there. All right. Thank you, everyone. Okay. And this is pretty important. Of a room like this, and for those who are watching online, it would be great if you could participate here. If you just joined late, you can just go to menti.com and pop in that number that's on the top there. But I really like to understand where everyone, at least in this room, is. And anyone who maybe has some doubts based on those definitions I've previously put in. Thank you, everyone, for being honest. There's quite clearly a preference here in this room, which is not surprising to me, but you might be pressured not to be honest. I'll find you. No, just kidding. Be honest. Please, please, where are you at? It'd be really good to understand where people in this room are at, and those who are watching. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being honest. So some of you think there is no God, and that is a perfectly acceptable explanation of where you are at. Some of you are spiritual, so some sort of spiritual higher power. Thank you. Okay, that's very helpful to know where you are at. Now let me just switch back there. All right, excellent. Thank you for being honest. Now, that is skewed for this room as a largely religious audience, and that is not a reflection of society. This room does not reflect the world that we are living in today. And the vast majority of people in the past would have identified the way most of you have identified, which is as a person who has faith, who believes in God particularly. But that has been eroding over the past many years. And the kind of history is important here. When you think about how changes in society that God is in, we think about how those changes in society have really seen big upheavals over a large period of time, particularly in the last 100 and 150 years. First, dentistry was painless. Then bicycles were chainless. Carriages were horseless and many laws enforceless. Next, crockery. I think that's also true in some countries. Cookery was fireless. Telegraphy was wireless. Cigars were nicotineless and coffee caffeineless. Soon oranges were seedless, the puddingless, the college boy hatless. Some of you might be old enough to remember that. And the proper diet fatless. Now motor roads are dustless. The latest steel is rustless. Our tennis courts are sodless, and our new religions godless. Of all of the changes that have happened in society, the one that has had the greatest single impact on the way that we live is this last major change. and it isn't a new one. Raise your hand if you were alive when this Time article came out. Raise your hand if you were alive then. Remember what happened then? This is really a moment in time where, beginning in the 60s, people started to ask, is God dead? And people began to follow the philosophies of people. And he gave this parable, the parable of the madman. God is dead. God remains dead. We have killed him. How shall we, murderer of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and mightiest of all, that the world has yet to possess, has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? And that is the question that we have to answer. Are we really ready to live in a society without God? Can man live without God? So as we move into the second half of tonight, it's just by way of a bit of a background. Now, I am a Christian, as I mentioned at the beginning, and if you're watching online, hopefully, I'm not sure what the comments are, but if you're commenting online, I would be very curious how many of you are also Christians. But as a Christian, and this is something that if you're not a believer, which some of you are in the room are not tonight, I don't know if you know this, but Christian believers actually have a God-given responsibility to be able to give an answer as to why they believe in God. And because that was my parents' religion, to me, does not constitute an answer that I could give to a colleague or someone that I went to school with, and it certainly didn't hold up its weight in college. And we move into a discipline called apologetics. And you're probably thinking, you're scratching your head going, you're sorry for what? What are you sorry for? Well, apologetics doesn't mean that you're sorry for anything. This word is from the Bible, and it comes from this verse. And it goes like this in the Bible. You don't have to have one. It says, always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you a reason of the hope that is within you, and with reverence. Now, the word where apologetics comes from, the Bible in the New Testament was originally written in, called apologia, and it's actually that phrase, to give an answer, to be ready to give an answer. And it literally means to respond, to give an answer, a reason. Now, this is something that all Christians particularly are being called to do. This is a Christian command from the Bible. Now, this should be true of anyone in any worldview. In fact, a worldview is very important to comprehend. When you think about a worldview fundamentally is something that sets how you interpret the world and why you believe in the value system that you believe in. So we should, and everyone should, be able to give an answer of why they believe in something like that. So when we think about it in terms of Christianity, as I start to give you some of my reasons, this is actually, I'm responding to a biblical command for me as a Christian to be able to give you, asks me, a reason for the hope that is within me. And so if you are a believer, and if you were in that large cluster at the bottom right there, this is also for you. This is a big challenge for you. Do you have a reason to the answer why I am not an atheist? Do you have a reason for why I am a Christian? And quite importantly, do you have the answer to why I am a Christadelphian? And obviously that's what we're trying to unpack as we go through this series. Now, hopefully as I give some of these reasons, they make sense. No word salad. I can't stand word salad. Many people have tried to get ideas past you by talking quickly, boozling you with lots of words. And as William Barclay once observed, it is usually true that the man unintelligible is not unintelligible because he himself is deep, but because he does not himself understand what he's talking about. So I will attempt very much to give you nice, straight, and clear answers. But I'd like to start off, and if you're a young person in the room, I want to take you back to, I don't know how many years, at least 20. Am I 42? I was 20 years old, so this is 22 years ago, then minus 2, so it's 24. 24 years ago. because I went to engineering school and I could do math. These are some questions that I had, and maybe they're frequently asked questions that you might have as well. But here are the questions that I wanted intelligible answers to. Not word salad, not gobbledygook. I wanted good answers. So here were some of my questions. Now, this is my top 8 big questions. And keep in mind, this is after my conversion to Christianity when I was 15. So these are questions that even me, as a converted Christian, had. And they might be questions that you have. For example, why does God choose to be hidden today versus the past? If God can stop evil, why doesn't he? Shouldn't he? Will science displace the need for God as an explanation? Do we really believe the Bible is God's revelation? Does the Big Bang evolution explain everything? How do we know that Jesus rose from the dead? Can't my life have meaning without religion? Why do we need God for morality? Maybe these are some of the questions that you have, even as a converted Christian. And if you are an atheist, many of these things, as Richard Dawkins has regularly, and many other atheists have regularly asked these kinds of questions. And they are rational questions. And if you are an atheist or even a deist in the room here tonight, I want to say these are good questions. These are questions that should be answered. These are questions that you should not just sweep under the rug, pretend they don't exist, commit intellectual suicide, and just not think about it and keep going on because this is a nice room to be in. That's not a good reason. That's not what 1 Peter 3:15 has commanded me to do. We need to think. The Christian and all people that have all worldviews need to take their head and their heart. Even in the Bible it says, I will sing with my spirit and with my understanding also. Anyone who believes in a religion should not check their brain at the door just to have community. So these were some of the questions that I had. Now, when we think about how that relates to belief, one of the things that I found a big challenge in my life was really questioning whether I truly believed in something. And some people go through this spiral, and you might identify with this, because I believed in God very simply. Now, I have children. I have a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old. They are not going to give me a dissertation on all the philosophies of why they believe that there is a God. They just, at the moment, they just simply believe. And it's a beautiful belief in its simplicity. But for them, how could there be no God? They can't even comprehend that. And with their little minds of what they've learned, all they really know right now is what they mirror from us. For all intents and purposes, we are God to our children when we are young, if you happen to be a theist. But it's black and white. You're either in or you're out. It's all known for sure. But as you start to learn a bit more and you graduate from being 10 years old, you get a little bit older, and I can see some younger people just over there. I don't know how old you all are, but you start to, especially as you go to high school, you might start moving into things get a bit more complex. There's a little bit more than one way to see things, and you want to know them. And then, once this is college, I started to get perplexed. I heard all these opinions and all these reasons that sounded legit. And everyone had an opinion, but how do we know who's right? I'm confused. And maybe that's you, or you at least know someone who's in that position. And if you're listening online, maybe that's you. But where we get to when we start to engage with reasoning is this beautiful finishing place. It's called harmony. Now, I'm in sense for me, but you are able to harmonize all of these things. So we seek first God's kingdom. The greatest of these is love. I got it. That's loving God and loving our neighbor. And in the essentials, we have unity, but in the non-essentials, I'm happy to have uncertainty. So we go from big ideas to a little bit more specific in terms of beliefs, and then fundamentally, we're happy to have things in tension. Life is not as clear, and we continue to learn. Now, what challenges some of these things, and if you are a theist here tonight, what might challenge you is when you listen to people who believe for no other reason than things that are quite silly. Like, for example, people that claim to have seen Christ and the cross appeared at a marking on their fence. I mean, it's literally a mark on a fence. But there's people that believe in this level of simplicity, or there must be a God because there's a revealed birthmark on my cat's fur, or even maybe you got to see, if you're a Catholic, which we'll hear from someone, maybe you believe in Mother Teresa and you've happened to find Mother Teresa in your breakfast. But that is ridiculous. There is no person who would really think that. And the God of the Bible doesn't want those kinds of superstitious reasons. That's not the God that we believe in. In fact, Christians get told in the Bible we should avoid these vain and profane babblings. We should refuse old wives' tales. These are not reasons. These are just silly. And these are things that, if that was the level of belief that you had, you really need to check your logic at the door. But this is a God that we believe, that asks us to use our brain. This is a God who, in a different context, but for the same appeal to reason, said, "Come, let us reason together." Now, you can have reasons, and just like those people that believe in God and they believe in Christ, but you could believe for the wrong reasons. Let me give you an illustration. 2 + 2 = 5, and 4 + 4 = 7, and therefore you conclude, what is 2 + 2 + 4 + 4? And you say 12. You may be correct, but for the wrong reasons. And I would hate to be in a situation where I end up believing something that is true for reasons that don't hold water, and reasons that are certainly not compelling to others when they can clearly see that your logic is incorrect. So it is very important as Christians, and I would hope, if you don't believe tonight you're here, I would hope that you would give patience to people who have grown up with a simplistic level. And there's nothing wrong with having a simplistic faith. My children have that right now. But as we get older and as we begin to test these things, we want to have good reasons, even if our original reasons led us to the right conclusion, but for the wrong reason. Now, let's talk for a minute about, we're not really sure if God exists, and you're in an agnostic scenario. Well, if we go back to another, call this the ancient dudes, like the people are black and white photos. This is clearly a colored version of what was a painting. Pascal. You may have heard this before. Raise your hand if you've ever heard Pascal's wager. Know what that is? Okay, so you know what that is. So this is a scenario where you say, well, look, here's my scenario that I'm faced with. If God exists, and I believe I've got everything to be a good quadrant to land in. Now, if God doesn't exist, and I don't believe, look, there's some gain. I guess you could make some argument that there's some gain. Maybe you didn't waste your time, and maybe you indulge yourself in a little bit more pleasure, which again, I say is not even true. But let's give that to be true. But if God doesn't exist, and you believe, if God does not exist and you believe, fundamentally, you could have you could have a finite loss. Like what really have you lost? We had great community. Most people say that Christians and people that believe in God are happier than people who don't. I mean, these are not true or not. These are just social experiment conclusions. But then maybe you lose something. But if God exists and you don't believe, you are trading an infinite gain, which is an infinite loss. And there are some people that on the basis of Pascal's wager just say, well, look, I'm not really sure, but I'm going to stick it out just in case. I'm not saying that's a bad choice to make, but you better not stay there. That is not a good position to be in, because you're making choices that your life fundamentally depends on. No, we want to have a little bit better than that. We want to use logic. And here's where I'll begin to use, again, I'm not going to be quoting the Bible. I'm not going to be referring to Christianity. I'm just going to be simply referring to reasons, logical reasons, why I believe there must be a God and that atheism is not true. And what I'm hoping is that all of these things can be tested by good logic, because all hypotheses need to be tested, all conclusions substantiated. Now, I hope your brain doesn't hurt for now. When I was in engineering school, these were the things that I wanted certainty on. I wanted to wrestle with these questions because it wasn't good enough for me. And I'm hoping that maybe tonight, or if you're listening online, that this might be you. So here are some lines of reasoning before we actually go into the arguments. So logic, let's follow this for a minute, because all of these things are predicated on believing in logic. And most people, even if you're not an atheist, you believe in the laws of logic, because that's how the laws of the universe work. So one element, this is philosophy. So one element is about rationality is deductive reasoning. So some conclusions that you make are, the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. Like, because this has to also be true, right? So if I drank something from this cup, there must be a cup. Like, so I could say I drank water, but there must be a cup. There must be true. Even if I just simply say I had a drink of water, it means there has to be a cup. An inductive argument, for example, this is the inference from particular observations and general concepts. For example, you haven't seen anything, but you hear the sound. I stop talking, and you hear the sound, and you hear me clapping my lips a little bit less. You're using inductive reasoning to say, he must have had a drink of water. You didn't see me have it, but you're using your faculties to determine that's probably what happened. Now, you can't be certain, but you have good reasons to believe so. And then lastly is abduction. Now, that sounds like a very strange word. Trust me, it's not as crazy as it sounds. Abductive reasoning is this. The conclusion is accepted on the basis that it is the best explanation given the available evidence. Now, this is what we talk about for certainty. When you think about Richard Dawkins, remember on that bus, what did he say? There's probably no God. Maybe he was trying on Pascal's wager. There's probably no God, so you may as well get on and enjoy life and stop worrying. It doesn't mean that he has no evidence. It's just he's admitting that he can't prove there's no God. And most atheists, and if that's you tonight in the room, I know that's true. And in the same way that I can't tell you for absolute certainty there is a God the way that there's a cup with water here, I know that that is also the case. Anyone that has that kind of perfect certainty is probably lying. Where most of us get to, regardless of where you land, is given what you know, you're making the conclusion because it's the best explanation given what you do know. And so when we think about the arguments, this is an abductive line of logic. It means that given all of these factors, my conclusion is there must be a God. Given all of these factors. Now, we could have an entire lecture on any one of these reasons, but we're not here for academia tonight. You probably have a feeling that we are. We're not. We are here just to take a cursory look at not Christianity, not being a Christadelphian, but how I have landed to believe it's more likely that there is a God than there isn't a God. And maybe some of these things will resound for you, and maybe you've never heard these pieces of logic cumulatively, and this is a cumulative argument. So, for example, one of the intellectual reasons to believe their explanatory power that there is a God is that science has proven that the universe had a beginning. People used to think the universe was eternal in the past. Now science is very clear, the expansion of the universe, that the universe had a moment in time, a singularity, the beginning. And because of that, space and time came into being at that moment. So that means it must have had a cause outside of itself, and that cause must not have been in time or space. The only kind of being that can do that is a God. Some kind of supernatural power. Doesn't mean it's Christian God, doesn't mean it's even personal, but something outside of space and time that has a creative power like that. Second is the ontological argument. This is that a necessarily existent being, like the one that's concluded from the previous argument, would therefore not be limited by time and space. So these two are kind of connected. If there was something that existed necessarily, as opposed to everything else in the universe that exists because it was created from a moment in time. That is the ontological argument. The next one is the teleological argument. That is what some people call intelligent design. Even science would say that it appears, even it's crazy how much it appears that there's to be designed, the universe appears to be designed. And if it appears to be designed, the likelihood is that it was caused by a designer. The next one is what some people call the noological argument. The fact that this is happening literally right now. Human consciousness, if we were made in the image of God, it has great explanatory power. Without that, no personal universe. Why is there not just nothing? Why is the rest of the universe not just the entirety of the universe? Human consciousness cannot be explained on purely materialistic grounds. You can't create consciousness in a petri dish. This argument is what human consciousness, particularly the kind that looks like the God of the Bible. Why is that true? The next one is general reason, which we're also doing tonight. The actual intelligibility of the universe, mathematics, the actual applicability of mathematics, that the universe can't be explained again. Surely should be purely, but maybe it is surely as well, on materialistic grounds, and seems to be the product of intelligence. The intelligibility of the universe, not even just that there's human consciousness, but also that the universe can be made sense of, laws that govern it. Again, related a little bit to the design. Morals. The fact that morals actually exist, that in this kind, as opposed to all other living beings, in the ones who are created by the image of God, the sense of right and wrong entails the existence of some moral being. Otherwise, morality, how is that possible? There's another one which the Bible sometimes talks about that God has set eternity in the hearts of man so that they would seek after him. Well, that's what the argument is called transcendent desire, that given the innate desire for there to be a divine, there is likely something that corresponds to that desire. For example, if I am thirsty, the feeling of thirst means that there's probably such a thing as water, which thirst with. If I am hungry, it probably corresponds to food. If I'm hot, a feeling of hot probably means that there is heat. So this desire for something fundamentally that all humans of all time has seemed to have had in all completely unrelated cultures seem to have this innate desire for God, unlike the animal kingdom. And then lastly, and people would testify here, I'm sure, tonight, the religious experience. It cannot be just tossed to the side, just like your experience can't be tossed to the side. People who have individual experience with the divine, whether it's recorded in a holy book or whether it's you here in the room tonight, the individual experience of the divine at least increases the probability that divinity exists. And fundamentally, there is direct witness through communication verified by supernatural means, which we as Christians has believed was happened and witnessed and recorded in what we believe is the Bible. Now, those are all in and of themselves, none of those are a good reason to believe. But given all of them, the likelihood that the only explanation to have all of those things be true is there a God. Now, any of those things, I'll just give you a link here, and that is simply just to say, if you want to, and a lot of my influence over these last 20 years looking at apologetics has come from people like John Lennox, William Lane Craig, and others. And William Lane Craig has a great website. It's a fantastic resource, very rational in its presentation, and that is Reasonable Faith. And if you Google the animated videos, there is an animated video for almost every one of those 5 to 6 minutes that will take you through the fine detail. That wasn't the purpose, clearly, of tonight. It's more to say, I'm telling you these cumulative reasons are what got me through college, are what got me from that complexity and that tension to harmony. I feel, having engaged my brain and not checked my brain at the door and run away from those questions, I've engaged with all of those arguments, and I am more certain now than ever that there must be a God to explain reality. Now, you might say, but like, hasn't science explained all that? Like, hasn't science just answered all of that? Well, it is true that science does have a lot of explanations, but you might not know this, but almost every OG scientist who wrote the first real big treatise on science were Christians. And the reason why they found the laws is because they believed in God and the God of reason and God of order. And so they looked for it because they expected to find it. Had they actually been atheists, they wouldn't have bothered because, as Dawkins said, the universe is just chaos and there's no order. There's nothing that governs it. But these scientists looked for science to be true, the applicability of mathematics and the applicability of science, because they believed in God. These are not incompatible. God gives a reason for science to actually exist. One writer put it like this: science, with all of its strident claims, must still remain contented to describe the what of human observations, and only God can answer the why. And I'll give you an illustration that came from John Lennox, and that is this: science can tell you why a kettle boils when you push down, and this is Australian, I didn't know what a kettle was when I first moved here, but science will tell you why is the kettle boiling. It'll give you all the scientific reasons, but the one thing that it can't tell you is that I wanted a cup of tea. You see, the why of the universe and the why we exist and why we are here. It's not just what are the rules that explain why my body doesn't just fall apart into particles, but why are you here? What is the meaning of life? And so as we begin to wrap up now, and if you have any questions, make sure you're putting it there into the Menti. You can just click ask a question. But the point for me is, I was not okay that what people were saying to me at university explained any of the why of life. And so I had to decide, how was I going to test my worldview? So the way that you test the truth of something, including all of those assertions, which if you're watching online or if you're here today, you may think some of those are just completely ridiculous because you have some other answer. And that's a totally respectable conclusion to come to. But you must test how your explanation of those things actually follows logic and a test for truth. So there are a few ways that we look at a test for truth. One, is the claim, including the ones that I just said, are they tenable? Or is it just completely ridiculous? Is it tenable? Is it reasonable? Is it coherent? Has it just been word salad? Do any of those things just completely not make any sense? Or is it actually coherent that those things are all true together? Is it plausible? Like, does it have explanatory power? Is it actually a plausible argument, or is it just a figment of your imagination like some cartoon? And lastly, can you engage with it intellectually? Is it rational? So if it's tenable, coherent, plausible, and rational, it passes the truth test. Does your faith, does your reasons, do your reasons? And if they don't, maybe it's time to start engaging a little bit more with your reasons. And I hope that some of tonight might be able to help you do that. So what we're going to do next time is we're actually going next time to look at if there is a God. We haven't said anything about what God, who, what, where, and if that's even knowable, even if it's personable. But here are the things that whatever worldview you have must answer. And it is these four major questions that we're going to answer in our next section. First, origin. Second, meaning. Third, morality. Fourth, destiny. The worldview you have, to live a consistent life, to have reasons for the worldview that you have, you must answer these four questions. How did we get here? You can ignore it, but you must answer that question. How did we get here? What is the origin of everything? Two, why? Why do we exist? What's the reason for existing? What gives living meaning? What gives pain meaning, for that matter? And then what should we do here? What governs how we ought to act, how we ought to interact with each other? And lastly, what's the end of life? Where do we go from here? And if your worldview, regardless of what it is, if your worldview can answer all four of those questions, and it's tenable, coherent, plausible, and rational, you should end up with a worldview that is, one, logically consistent in all of its claims. Two, it's verifiable. You can empirically verify that what you're out there, you can test it, you can try it. It has explanatory power. It is relevant. Your worldview, even if you could have the most crazy philosophy, but like, is it relevant to how you actually exist? And then lastly, does it answer the hard questions when they come your way? Is it rationally adequate? So the four real options that we have in terms of theism that we're going to zoom right into next time is in atheism. There are a few versions of that: complete naturalism, agnosticism, or even just a skepticism. That's still one kind of conclusion. The second one, of which Christianity belongs, is monotheism. Now, there are a few monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These are monotheistic religions. Next, polytheism. There are plenty of religions that believe in God, but not just one, but many gods to explain reality. And that is things like Hinduism, paganism, and Baha'i, which really takes all religions. And then lastly, pantheism, which I've had to learn a lot about when living here. People that come from pantheistic religions like Buddhism, Taoism, and ultimately true humanism. That is what we want to land on next time. We want to look at these things, and our next presenter is going to look at all of these things and look at Christianity in particular compared to some of these other worldviews. Now, these are all worldviews that are worth considering, and three of those would all agree with almost everything that I said tonight. Nothing that I've said tonight means Christianity must be true. All we've really concluded tonight, or at least that I've given reasons why I've concluded there must be a God, are universal. They're not unique to Christadelphians or Christians. These are arguments that have been, some of these arguments are actually centuries old and well trodden. But if I can leave you with two verses from the Bible, because I am a Christian and I do want to tell you, some of what I've said tonight is precisely what the Bible says you should also conclude, even if you don't know a Christian or you've never held a Bible in your life. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, and watch the mind engagement here, by being understood by the things that are made, even these two things about God. He's eternal power and his nature being divine. So compelling, as it is for me here tonight, that they are without excuse. And if you're a Bible student in the room, this is the inverse of the word apologetics. It actually is an ana-apologetic. It is indefensible, without an answer, without excuse. So at least the writers of the Bible, even before the Enlightenment, all the way back when people could barely write and read, but you could open your eyes and you could observe the world that you live in. And these two things you must conclude about the world that we live in: that there is an eternal power, and there must be a God with a divine nature. And a Christian, a very, very long time ago, went into a pantheistic location called Athens. You may have heard of it before. And when Paul, one of the early Christians who's in the Bible, when he was standing there, he looked around at people's belief in God, and he said this. His hope was, and my hope for you, and the reason for inviting you out tonight, is that you would seek God in hope that they might feel their way toward him and find him, which is what I did in college, feeling and finding my way. And if that's you, that's the same appeal that the Bible had for me, has for you. And the truth is, yet he is not actually far from each one of us to be found. Because in him we live and we move and we have our very being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. God has appointed a day when he will judge this world in righteousness, I believe as a Christian. And if that's true, we better be sure. And if it's not true, I better have good reasons. Pascal's wager aside. And fundamentally, if looking at the universe, when I look at everything in the universe, fundamentally, if it's true that for all of our moral virtue that has fallen, someone died to pay the price so that I could be redeemed to this God, I better be sure. And if it's true, I'm compelled to do something about it. And we're going to end up with a conclusion. We really only have three options based after tonight. And that is that all religions are false, all religions are true, or that one of them is true. There have been the exact opposite of our talk in October, which is why I am a Christian. There are plenty of people who have argued the inverse of that, why they are not a Christian. But we are going to be sharing, based on what we've looked at tonight, we are going to be sharing with you, at least from our experience, why I believe what I believe. And I hope that you have reasons. Because if you don't believe, as G.K. Chesterton once said, the tragedy of disbelieving in God is not that a person may end up believing in nothing. Alas, it's much worse that a person may end up believing in anything. And so what I'm hoping that will happen is if you'd like to talk about this, even if you're online tonight or you're watching, what I would love for you to do is just share. If you'd like to talk more about this, come have supper. If you'd like to talk more about this, we'd love to engage. I would love to engage with you. And if you want somebody to follow up with you in person or just send you an email and turn over some of these things more, even if you want to have a healthy debate about it, that's great. Let us know. We'd love to engage with you. And so on your screen there, you're welcome now to put in any of your details. So it is my hope that tonight was helpful for you, because when I look out into the world and I see the state of the world that we live in, outside of Jesus Christ and his resurrection and what that means for humanity, I don't know of any other hope for mankind. And I'd love to continue to talk to you about that next time. Thanks. Let's take some of the questions. First of all, thanks for your attention. Hope your brain doesn't seriously hurt right now. You can go get a drink of water later. And if you need to go back and get some of this material, we'll make this available to everyone. Now, they are thinky things, and I'm sure some of your questions are also going to be thinky things. So let's have a look. All right, so why doesn't God talk audibly in response to prayer? I think this is probably helpful to understand, and I think I may have actually had it written down because it was a really good quote, and it's this one here. C.S. Lewis once said, "If there was a controlling power outside the universe, it could not show itself to us as one of the facts inside the universe any more than the architect of a house could actually be a wall or a staircase or a fireplace in the house." Remember, one of the arguments that we said is that God is outside of space and time. And so if he is outside of space and time, we don't expect that if we fly a certain amount of millions and millions and trillions of miles that we're eventually going to land on God. Fundamentally, God is outside of space and time. So we don't anticipate him finding him. I know that's not the question, but that's kind of like a precursor to the question. And one of the reasons why God has chosen to reveal himself to us in the way that he has is because he knows our frame. And we might be able to talk about this, but this is not an easy question. Remember, it's one of the questions that I had when I was in university. Why doesn't God just reveal himself? Well, the truth of the matter is, God has done that in the past. He has revealed himself quite audibly, and it made no difference. And God, in his wisdom, the way that we find God in our minds and in our spirits and through meditation, God has concluded that that is, contrary to what humans would say to prove there was a cup of water, the best way to reveal himself to us and to truly find him and not turn him into a genie rubbing a bottle is in meditation and prayer. And God does answer prayer, and he does bear witness with our spirit, as the book of Romans chapter 8 talks about. His spirit bears witness with our spirit. But it is true that the God that we understand, he has done this before, very occasionally, and it didn't really make any difference. If God answered our prayer with a big banner in the sky like we have with a helicopter or a plane giving us an answer, you would probably ask for that every time. God wants his people to engage their minds, read about him, and become more like him, and answer their own prayers. And as a Christian, fundamentally, we believe that prayer is more about us. It's not rubbing a lamp so we get an answer. That definitely doesn't work. And so prayer is much more about reputation. So again, going from a very simplistic view of what something like prayer is, it requires a lot more nuance. And I would love to, whoever has that question, I'd love to talk to you more about that, because it's something I think we all wrestle with, but there are very good, rational, coherent reasons that God has for not always answering audibly in a prayer. Very much so. Hope that partially answers the question. All right. When you want to believe and want the Bible to be true, how do you know if it actually is, given an inherent bias towards it due to a desire for it to be true? Absolutely. Confirmation bias is one of the worst logical fallacies. And that's why I am suggesting at all Christians, we can move from simplicity to complexity. And ultimately, when we seek it, we might want it to be true, but we should not be afraid to test it. Now, the truth of the matter is, when we do test the Bible, it's truth about humanity. It's being able to be empirically verified through everything from archaeology to even pre-science, before science was even a thing. You will find that there are stacks and stacks of evidence that the Bible can be trusted and that God is true. But I totally agree with this question that we might have a confirmation bias to want it to be true. So in the arena of ideas, we need not be afraid, but we do need to make those answers and conclude those answers. And that might be something that we need to do in community. And if you're a Christian, if you're online or here, I don't know if you're part of a community, but that is one of the reasons why Christians are called to be in community, because some of these questions we discover as a group and as a family. And that is the way God intended it. Another question. If there is a good God, why can nature be so violent and brutal? Yes, nature is red in tooth and claw. And that is the world that God said we would find him in. God would agree with this, that there is injustice and pain. And the greatest example of why God saying, I get it, and I'm not going to do anything about it, is that he sent his son to actually be violently and brutally killed. And God didn't remove that even from his own son. And the pain that even God feels in the Christian worldview, even the pain that God feels, why couldn't God have made a better world for him? He gets sad too. It says that even the death of his saints is precious in the eyes of God. So couldn't God have done it for God's sake in a better way? You bet he could. But if this is the world, and this is sorry to quote C.S. Lewis here again, but if this is the world that God chose for us to find him, and the world that has all of its chaos and disaster and violence is the world that he wants us to find him in, we must take it to be true that God knows what he's doing and that this was the best possible world for us to find true happiness and true love and fun through the pain. I might just, I have a lot of these extra slides that are hidden towards the end, but I will quote this one. This is one from G.K. Chesterton. He put it this way: meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness comes from being weary of pleasure. God wants us to find meaning, and some of the greatest meaning that we find is when we're in the deepest of pain. That's where we find community. Ooh, sorry, I'm just, that was quite an emotional thing. Don't look me in the eye when I say things like that. But it is true, you all know that when we are in the deepest of pain, that is when we feel love the closest, and that is the world that God concluded us to live in and gives us the most meaning, as challenging as that is. He could have made a cotton-filled world, and we never would have known what love and comfort and all the characteristics that the God of the Bible reveals. This was the world that he knew, and he is saying, one day I will remove there will be no more crying, no more pain, for the former things are passed away. And one of the chapters in the Bible, in the book of Isaiah, says, neither will they even come to mind. And so if this is the short, tiny little infinitesimal time in the total of eternity that we have to feel pain to pave us in, to be in God's image and live with him and his angels eternally, with all of those who believe that, this is a price that we have to take that God in his wisdom was willing for us to pay.
James, just to point out, there's actually another 7 questions, so I've had a lot of interest tonight, which is great, but it's already 10 past, so I'm just wondering if perhaps we maybe take maybe one more, and then anyone else can perhaps come up and speak to you afterwards. Would that be okay with everyone?
Sure, yeah. I'm happy to do that, or alternatively,
read through them otherwise.
Yeah, otherwise, I'm happy for if anyone needs to go, they can, but for the sake of the recording, if you pick, Alistair.
Well, perhaps the most popular ones, and
Yep.
the next most popular ones.
Yeah, whatever's the most appropriate
and
question.
perhaps we'll leave the other ones for people to come up.
Okay, that sounds good. And what we might do is if there's any questions that don't get answered, we can actually talk about them over supper, or you can put them in the chat, post them on our Melbourne Christadelphians website. We'd be more than happy to engage with those questions, as hopefully some of the ones that have already been posted are happy to be, we've demonstrated we want to engage with. All right, how do we know when God is speaking as opposed to being simply coincidence? Well, I don't know. There have been people that have been directly revealed to God, but with our confirmation bias, there is very many times where it could 100% be just what we wanted to be. And that is why the way that I've always handled this one is when I think it is God's prodding, if God is revealing himself in my inner spirit, bearing witness with my spirit, I would always want a secondary confirmation that is external. I've shared this even with some of you, that the internal confirmation paired with an external confirmation that's independent and unprodded is often how I ask God to reveal truth to me as I seek and reach after him, as we read in that verse. So that's just a tip that I have. If that's for you, we really don't know. And the human heart is deceitful and desperately wicked, and we could 100% be looking for our own answers that we'd like to hear. The best thing to do, we read the Bible to look at God's revealed truth to see if that is compatible with his revealed truth for all those logical consistency and coherence. God would never ask me to do something if he existed that he himself commanded against. And then secondly, we pray for God's confirmation. There are some examples even in the Bible where God asked people for external signs. Hopefully that helps, and maybe our next presenter can do that one. How do we test the Bible is out of scope for tonight. We'll leave that next time. That is a big part of the next presenter's discussion is archaeology in the Bible, so we might just leave that one. Why does God let people die? Again, I'm going to leave that for religion to solve. That's not tonight. Tonight is not concluding any kind of theistic conclusion, so I might just leave that one. I would say the answer that I gave earlier is probably close to that this is the way that God wanted us to find him. That might be the end of it, I think. Okay, sounds good. Well, if your brains aren't hurting too much, come out. Get a drink. You probably need one, so do I. But I really hope that tonight, if you're watching online, I hope that was intellectually stimulating for you, and you can at least believe that Christians have not checked their brains at the door. There are very good reasons to believe that there is a God, and I'm hoping that as we move on to our next presentations, we've at least concluded that there is a God is the best explanation of reality, but we need to know which one, who, and why. And why I am a Christian is our next topic. Thank you. There we go. All right. Hopefully see you next time. Thank you.
Well, thanks, James, for that. got a bit, my brain is hurt just a little bit. But thank you for that presentation, and thank you, folks in the room and online for sticking with us on that one. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. James will likely be out at supper. Speaking of which, there will be supper soon in the kitchen, I believe, afterwards. So if you'd like to stop by for that's why the kettle's boiling, or some food, please feel free to stick with us and have a chat. As James has said, in about 3 weeks' time, Jared is going to be talking to us on why I am a Christian, and that'll be a follow-on, obviously looking at narrowing down that field yet again from theism to Christianity and exploring that as a testimonial as well. So again, thank you for being with us tonight. Hopefully we'll see you again in 3 weeks' time, and again after that for why I am a Christadelphian in November. But right now, if you just bow your heads, we'll close with prayer and thanks for supper. Father in heaven, we come before you at this time to thank you for your presence, to thank you for your word and the hope that it gives us. We ask that you would help us to derive understanding, that our questions may be answered. We know that you do answer our questions, and we just have to seek you. We thank you for everything you've done for us, especially at this time, for the food that you provide for us. We are indeed blessed. We would ask tonight that you would keep us all in the palm of your hand until your Son returns, as we pray to you through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.